All right, so now that we're done and I've gone through this game, I'm gonna go ahead and share my thoughts with it by reviewing it based on what I played. So let's get into it. Routine, a game that has been in, I don't want to say development hell, but has been a project that has been in the works from what I found out, the last nearly 14 years. It got picked up again within the last 5 years and became the project that it is today. It is a sci-fi horror game that does things a little bit differently. It does have survival elements to it, and of course it does have as well a 80s version of the future, with the game obviously having different people in different time frames picking up the pieces from where we left off. And obviously I just realized how the game ends too, and I just figured out the ending. Sorry, I just realized it. I understood what it meant, but this is gonna be non-spoilers. So anyway, heavy on the 80s futuristic vibes, which I really like. It does feel like the films, the sci-fi films of that era, you know, the late 70s and the 80s and what have you. So it really does set the tone with that. So before we get into it, let's go into what I'm gonna start off with what I did not particularly like about the game. I will say, for most players, I think the biggest thing about this game that you will notice just from playing it for a little bit is the lack of explanation. I don't want to say that's a negative per se, but I want to throw it in this because I think some people might get lost really easily. The game is, I think at times, sometimes overly complicated, because it's one of those things where it might want you to do something and you do it and you think, oh, now I can progress, but you might actually have to go back and hit the switch again that you just hit, even though you think it's done. So there's a lot of stages, and I think they make everything a little bit they over-engineer some of these things, but it's one of those things that requires a lot more learning, and I feel like to the average gamer, I wouldn't say people are going to be able to play it as easily. It wasn't terrible for me. I got stuck only a couple of times. One time I got stuck really, really long, mainly because I was trying to search for an area that didn't exist yet, because I was searching in the completely wrong location based on the fact that I had to go back and try it again. So it doesn't really tell you anything. Again, some people like love that. I will say I'm fine with that, because immersion it's going to be very contrasting, and I'm probably going to contradict myself a little bit by saying this later, but I can understand how this might be a little bit overwhelming to people. Like, we had people pop in the chat asking for help with the very first, like, I don't even want to say puzzle to get, literally, you spawn in the game, you wake up, you get the device, and then they give you a code to the elevator. People were still struggling to find that code. When I first was looking for that code, I mean, it took me a minute, but once I figured out how the system works, it wasn't too hard to find. So I feel like some people might struggle, some people might not. I think it just depends. Like I said, you do really have to, the game takes a minute for you to understand what it's delivering to you. So I guess in that retrospect, it might be hard to get into, and I feel like some folks might be like, you know what, this is too complicated for me, I'm not even gonna bother. Especially if it's on Game Pass and you have Game Pass and you're not really paying money per se to play this particular game, but it's included. It's one of those things, you know what I mean? It definitely is one of those things. So I'm putting it in as what I didn't like to a degree, because like I said, it can scare off some people, and I think that could be bad for an indie game. You know what I mean? I feel like you want to try and give them some sort of direction, or at least give people the option that there might be a direction, or you can play on like a harder difficulty where there's literally no help whatsoever, because a lot of games do that, you know? There's a lot of games where they give you a waypoint, there's some games where they don't. I think if you had the option to give people a waypoint for those who didn't want to waste any time, I think that would help out immensely. In terms of the story, I'd say it was kind of hard to follow at times, but it's kind of like one of those things where it all gets revealed at the end as why. You know, one minute you're seeing notes that are in the 90s, like it's like 98, 97, whatever, and then you're seeing things in the 70s, and you're trying to understand what happened. There's random spots where your character just blacks out and things like that, and obviously the story gets more apparent as you go on. But again, I feel like for most of it, I'd say about like 80% of the game, the story is like, you don't really know what the hell is happening. You can like read all the lore that you can and get an idea. And this is one of those things, if you do not read the lore at all, you're going to be very confused. I mean, if you don't read the emails, you know, you don't read the diary sections, which for most people, and listen to the audio logs as well, if you don't do any of that, I feel like you're going to be completely stranded on an island not knowing what's going on. So this requires a heavy amount of lore reading and writing and listening to and all that stuff to understand what the hell is actually happening around you to somewhat of a degree. And you also need to do it anyway for puzzles and things. So again, some people who do not like to do that, I like to do that, so it doesn't really affect me. But for those people who don't like to do that, you're going to be spending a lot more time reading terminals and things like that. So I can see how some folk might not like that, and it just might kill their vibe for them, especially when if you didn't read something, it's like, oh man, maybe there was something on the terminal, I have to go back and read it, so you have to hunt it down and read it again. So yeah, I can understand how that would be a little bit weird. Another thing I want to mention is the actual AI itself. There were 2 threats in the game. Obviously, spoiler alert coming for this one. There's 2 threats in the game. I'm gonna be as vague as I can. The first threat is the one that you really see in the trailers, and that are the Type 5 like robots. They give you the impression that there is like the only enemy in the game, and quite frankly, those guys are only really enemies for the first couple of chapters. I'd say once you get through, I think on chapter 3. I think chapter 3 is kind of like the short chapter, right? Yeah, so chapter 3 doesn't count. So chapters 1 and 2, you're pretty much only dealing with those bots, and then from then on, you never see them again. The bots are completely out of the picture. So it does seem like the bots are going to be like a common enemy, and you might see them more and more. But once you're out of that first section, it's kind of like, nope, this is your first stage enemy, and then you move on to the next one. And one thing I will say about the bots is they were extremely easy to take advantage of. There was not really a moment where I wasn't able to outrun a bot. I think I got grabbed by one bot one time. I was never killed by a bot because I think the bots have a bit of a buffer. So if they do grab you, they throw you, and then I think if they grab you a second time, I think that's when they kill you. But they never actually killed me at all. And really the only time they grabbed me, I think, like I said, they grabbed me one time from a hiding spot because I didn't know they could grab you through a tunnel. And then there was another time where it was scripted where the bot was supposed to grab you. The Type 5 was supposed to grab you. So I think it was pretty... Yeah, I feel like those guys were really easy to take advantage of. They weren't that fast. You could really do an easy ring around the rosy and then just sprint to a hiding spot. They lost sight of you very, very quickly. And even if they are in front of you, they have like a scan feature that will, if you're in the scan, it detects movement, it'll come after you. But you could be, I don't know, maybe about 7 to 10 feet away from them, maybe a little bit more, and you won't be in their gaze, and they won't see you if you don't move, like a T-Rex style of thing, you know, like in Jurassic Park. So I feel, like I said, I feel like those AI, even though they're kind of scary at times and they're a presence, like they're heavy-footed, you can hear them around the corners, you can hear them activate. They're just so inconsistent with like when they activate. Sometimes you can walk right behind them. Sometimes you're like stealthing behind them and they won't see you. Sometimes you're stealthing behind them, they do see you or hear you, and they just activate for no reason. But even if they do activate, I've never really found it was that hard to get away from them. So I feel like those bots kind of, they're setting the tone, but I think they could have done a little bit better in terms of being more threatening, especially considering there's no difficulty settings in this game. It's literally whatever you play in the game is what you get. So I feel like those guys could have definitely added a little bit more to it. And once you get to the other enemy, again, same kind of thing. I won't go into too much detail what the other enemy is, but that enemy had a whole different like layer of like, you know, coming after you, but the logic still stands there. You could easily just, as long as you get enough distance and you know where this enemy is, you can just basically run away from it in the opposite corner, find a place to hide it, and lose sight of you. As long as you're running a decent amount of time, it is a little bit quicker, but it's still relatively easy to take advantage of it. There were times where I ran into like a wall where it's like there's less and less routes, so you feel more compressed, so there's less places you can hide and get around the enemy. You're more likely to run into it. But I never really found that it really was hindering me that much, except for getting me with jump scares. You know what I mean? Occasionally it would grab me or whatever, and I'd get absolutely annihilated that way. But there isn't really any other threats other than these 2 different types of enemies throughout the game. And for the most part, you are relatively safe. It does give you that element of you are in an area and you have a task to do and you are under threat of this at certain times, but those moments were very, very few and far between. So throughout the game, I felt very, very safe, and I wasn't really concerned with it whatsoever. So I never really felt the threats in this game were all that threatening. I started shooting the bots early. You know, I actually pulled the whole thing about using a battery to shoot it. The only real thing you need to do, you don't even have to attack a single bot or enemy at all with that thing if you don't want to, unless you wanted to get that achievement where you had to, you know, shoot, like disable one, where there was literally only one bot that had it. His chest was exposed and he had his core showing. So all you had to do is shoot him once. That would probably be the only time if you wanted to get that achievement. Otherwise, you don't have to shoot a single bot one time. You can just run away from it and save all that energy. But you know, which leads to the point, the magazines, like using the different like batteries for different functions, it seemed confusing because I'm like, why don't I have this thing reloaded? But every time you use one, it has a certain amount of charges. So every time you use a charge for a particular purpose, whether it be the UV light or the scanner or the overcharge as well, they use a significant different amount of battery. So you pick up different batteries as you go, and depending how much you use, they have different function. But I never really felt like I didn't have enough battery. I ran out of battery a couple times in the beginning and a little bit towards the end. But it never really was a survival issue. Like, you know, survival games, like you have to preserve your battery or preserve your ammunition. Never really ran into a moment where I was like, okay, I am stuck with my back against the wall. I got no battery. I got no means of fighting back at any point of it. But at this point, it's like I said, it was so plentiful that even if you did run out of batteries, just look around a little bit and there would be plenty to give you. There's tons. Like, there was a lot of times I'd be like, oh, there's like 3 batteries here. It would only let you pick up 1 because you're full. So as long as you're smart with it and you don't just shoot everything in sight, like I said, the only reason you have to use that overload feature is if you're actually shooting like one of the terminals or one of those things to power up or reset the system or a breaker or something like that. Basically story-based related stuff. That's the only time you really needed to use that one. So it's not really that threatening. And the whole, like I said, one of the major survival elements of the game is almost completely redundant, and you can just sprint and run away from everybody, which leads me to the point, like I said, again, there's no other difficulty setting in the game, so you can't make it that they're more, you know, the AI is more aggressive. You can't make it that you have less ammo. It's just one difficulty, one game, that's it. So that's how you know that this basis is, I think they need to come in later with some more updates. I think they need to add another difficulty mode or multiple difficulty modes, you know, make it a little bit more survival-esque, because I know if you're playing a game like this, you like survival games, you like survival horror games, and you're going to be comparing it to some of the big dogs, you know, like, you know, think of like Resident Evil or Alien Isolation. There's going to be a lot of comparisons to those games, and I don't really think there's really any concern when it comes to surviving. It's really quite just easy, you know, which leads me to one last thing I wanted to talk about in terms of what I didn't like about the game before we actually get into some positive stuff. So I wanted to get the bad stuff out of the way first. I will say the mood and the visuals, I know they're trying to make it seem like you're watching like an old VHS tape or something like that. So there's a heavy film grain. There's like very dim lighting. But there's nothing it's almost like you're looking through an old camcorder screen. You know, you're not actually in the POV of the player you're playing, but rather you're watching from a helmet cam or something. So the whole time it looks kind of like this menu does, you know. Having such dimly lit areas, even with the brightness turned up a little bit, there are areas that are so damn dark. I know they want you to use your cat to help like use the flashlight, and you can only use it when you're aiming it down, so it takes up a portion of the screen, and you can only move so fast and things like that. So you can't just hold a flashlight in an area and walk through it safely and know what you're getting into. That's part of the scare, I get it. But it almost seems kind of tedious having to do all that all at once. It's like I said, too many moving parts, too many things it's trying to do. It's over-engineered. It feels like it's almost like clunky to just do basic things. And I like it when things are like, oh, you have to hit a button on a thing and then turn it off. That's realistic. But I feel like they added so many things in every area that it doesn't really make sense. Like, case in point, your guy would automatically turn on a flashlight when you're in an event, when you're crawling, but when you're walking around, the flashlight just doesn't exist anymore. It's like there's a different flashlight. There's like a helmet flashlight and all this other stuff. So it's just kind of odd. I feel like some of the mechanics should be a little bit better, and I know they're trying to make that part of the scare, but it almost just seemed like, I think it would have been fine if you just gave me a flashlight. I think the flashlight, just like let me have a flashlight on my helmet, because even in the thumbnail, there's a flashlight on the character's helmet, and you never really get to use that flashlight. So it's kind of like, okay, he's gonna use this little thing, just walking around aiming down the sights for the flashlight. It just seems kind of weird. So I don't know. Couple of things here I'm kind of nitpicking, but I feel like in a game that's not that long, because like this took me 6 hours, and I did waste a lot of time on one of the chapters because I got lost. I would have shed at least an hour off of that, I think. So in retrospect, I feel like all the chapters are probably around 45 minutes to an hour long on your first try if you relatively know what you're doing, with that one chapter being only about 10 minutes. So given the fact that there's like 6 chapters with like an epilogue, and then there's like a chapter, I don't know, I guess, and the one chapter is so short. Really, there's only 5 chapters that are roughly 45 minutes to an hour. So realistically, this game can be beaten, I'd say, in like 5 hours or less on average. I say most people are going to beat it in 5 hours or less, which leads me to the price point, $20 USD. From what I think, $20 USD, correct me if I'm wrong. I'm Canadian, so I get the Canadian price. It was like 30 something Canadian. I have Game Pass, so I just got to play it on Game Pass. So if you don't have Game Pass though, which I know a lot of people cancel Game Pass because of the massive price hike, is it going to be one of those games that's got the value for money? Well, let's take a look at this. It doesn't really have a hell of a lot of replay value to it. Like, look, I've done it all. There's no other difficulty modes. There's no, there's no like collectible hunting. There's none of that. Yes, there's achievements. And like I said, I think every single achievement that I got in the game is all unlockable just by playing through it one time. With the only one that I could see missable, like I said, was that one near the beginning where you have to disable a type 5. But it's obvious that's what you do because it's got an exposed core. But I think it wants you to disable it anyway. So there's a part of it that's like, maybe I should try disabling. Like, your instinct will be to try and shoot it seeing that exposed core anyway. So I don't think there's really any time where you would miss an achievement. So therefore, the replay value, you get everything on the first go. No, like I said, one difficulty mode, only about 5 hours, and you're paying like $20 to $30 depending on what your, where you are, what your currency is worth, and all that. So you're gonna have to really consider that. So before you purchase it, okay? So bit expensive. I don't think there's a lot of replay value here, unfortunately. Now, let's go in to what I did like about the game. Now that I got all that stuff done, there was a lot. It seems like a lot, but I also want to kind of polarize it a little bit. So first thing I want to say is this game is very unique. The whole point of the game is to really stand out from being just another walking sim. I do like that they have the 80s style futuristic, like what the vision of the future would look like if you were in the 70s or 1980s. I love that vibe. It's kind of raw, it's gritty, it's still kind of old fashioned, but it's got a twist of like modern in it, you know what I mean? Like all this technology, but the technology looks so dated, but somehow they use that technology to get to this futuristic place. They were able to get people to the moon to study to study potential life there or whatever it ends up being. And I love that kind of vibe, which sets, like I said, the environment, the mood itself, the lighting, even though it's dark and really dimly lit in certain areas, it really does set the vibe and the tone for the game very, very quickly. Atmospherically, it is absolutely amazing. I've always been a fan of this kind of stuff, and adding that film layer, even though it's kind of hard to see, like I said, it makes a lot of sense. This game is trying to throw as much immersion and realism at you as possible, and that shows itself with the gameplay. And the entire game, it does not give you a waypoint, except for maybe when you log in to your wireless points, and you could look at your tasks, so what you need to do, but you can't access that at any moment. You have to go to those locations and see what you need to do to stay on track. Otherwise, I mean, it makes sense, like this futuristic world, but you might not have something that you could just pull up at any time with a list, So I do like that they give you that, and how some of the puzzles and just doing stuff in the game requires you to pay attention to what you're seeing, what you're reading, what you're hearing as well. There's a lot of things that require you to do that. Like there's audio logs that mention like other things that I would have to look for, to get a code, things like that. And like I said, it doesn't log it except if you go to that one place. So you really got to pay attention to it. Like, look at it. It's like like I said, I was going to contradict myself earlier. While it does make it tougher for a lot of people to kind of get into the game, I think it's cool that they don't have too much hand holding in this one, just because it makes the game seem more real, like you're actually in this person's shoes, but you're also kind of not. You're like in the second person. You're not in first person, you're not third person, you're second person. You're in their first person POV, but you're like watching from a helmet cam, or maybe that's the cam they have, and that's how they show a clear screen and you're able to see. I don't know, maybe it's not clear and that you're just looking on a TV screen. Either way, it adds this whole new layer of immersion, and I think that's a really cool thing. And it does add, honestly, a feeling of dread, because you're kind of like, well, where do I go? I don't know. This is what it would be like. You wouldn't have a video game HUD system to help you get to point A to point B. You'd have to figure it out. And I do kind of appreciate that, because like the puzzles in the game, even though it can be over engineered and a little bit overly complicated at times, they're not that hard to figure out. And once you understand what the game is like, you can kind of be like, oh wait, I should check that. And it makes you think a little bit more about what you're doing before you actually do it. You can't just assume anything. It kind of flips the script a little bit. So like what you're used to in video games isn't necessarily what you have to do. You might be used to something in other games of this type, but this game is just like, no, I'm not going to tell you anything. You're going to have to just pay attention and actually like read and like listen. So while some people might not like having to read lore, I like reading lore, especially when it's interesting and it's delivered in the fashion that it is. And it's not too overwhelming. There's not a million things. They're short. They're not too long. It just does it very well in that regard. Which leads me now back to the enemies. Now, while the enemies were, I'd say, easy to take advantage of, I'd say they did a fantastic job at jump scaring you and actually getting you in situations where you weren't ready. I've played so many different games that had jump scare after jump scare. You can kind of read them after a while, you know what I mean? And even though you might get jump scared, it doesn't scare you like it used to. You know what I mean? Like you're used to that sort of thing. You can kind of like emphasize like, oh, it's a cliche, this jump scare has been done before. They didn't really have any cliches in this game. And I will say with that second enemy, That guy, it would be so funny. I would literally get jump scared by him 1 second and he'd kill me. I'd load the exact same spawn and I would know he's there, and he would, based on how they designed that second enemy, you wouldn't really know he's there, and he's there. And even though he came at you the exact same way the first time, I got jump scared 3 times in the same location knowing he was there. How does that happen? It's never happened. I'm always ready to rock. You might get me one time and then I'll be prepared, but they had some great jump scares and it made sense. You weren't expecting it. It's one of those ones where it's like it actually is making you question if I'm safing it at any time. Even though it might be scripted, it still gets you, and I wish there were more of them. I feel like there weren't enough of those, but there were quite a handful of jump scares. I just feel like this game needed a bit more like, I don't want to say a bit more time because it had a ton of time of development. I just feel like this needed to be a much longer game, because when I really think about it, there's a lot of questions that we have answered. I did figure it out at the end what happened. You know how I meant. I'll give you a hint though. It was mentioning, you know, how like we were playing in the 90s and then we were looking at things in, you know, we were looking at logs from the 70s and then we were looking at another log at the, you know, from like 2025, all that kind of stuff. It all makes sense when you think about it. You know what I mean? So the story is pretty deep. It's got a lot of layers to it. And I do like how they ended with it. Again, it does leave a lot to the imagination. I just wish there was a bit more game here. You know what I mean? I think there's a lot this game could do. I think it needed to be longer. I think there needed to be more sections where it would, you know, just advance on the things it did so well, you know, atmospherically, and just to keep the pace of the game going. Because it just seemed like there was a lot of areas that I think it could have just done a little bit better, which is where I'm going to go here and summarize the game. You know, from what I've seen. So the game atmospherically is absolutely stunning. You know, it does things very, very well like that. It sets the tone. It sets a vibe that you can really just get into, where with unpredictable jump scares and pretty unique enemies, but they can be taken advantage of pretty easily. And, you know, while the game does make you think and it really shakes things up, so it's not holding your hand, but it doesn't make it overly complicated. I feel like they've over-engineered certain things, certain puzzles, certain actions. It feels clunky at times, and at some point you're just like, just go. You know, you just kind of get frustrated with just hitting 16 different combination of buttons just to do one task, you know what I mean? Or something simple. And, you know, a lot of the times it was supposed to be, you know, you were never supposed to be like safe at any given moment, but there were so many areas where you were safe at every given moment, and there was only a couple of areas. I wish there was more places that we weren't safe and they weren't so easily taken advantage of, and I wish the game was longer, and I wish it got to the point of the story a little bit quicker instead of just being super, like, you know, mystical. I understand like hinting stuff, but I feel like if they gave us more tools throughout rather than just dumping on us kind of towards like the end of the game, I think it would have kept the interest up for a lot of people there. So overall, I like what they did with the game. I think it was pretty solid. I think it's a bit overpriced considering there's literally no replay value. Once you're done the game, there's really no reason to play it again unless you really wanted to do it again. Obviously, having that cycling, the codes, like all the codes you get to unlock doors, terminals, what have you, all those are cycling. Every new game you do, it's different. So I do like that. So it doesn't let you do what you could do in other survival horror games where you learn the code and then by the time you play a game again, you can basically speed run it and just skip it by knowing the code and writing it down. But it requires you to do that action. So everybody's experience is going to be different, and you can't just look up a guide. You have to do it. You can't just cheat and shortcut. You got to do the action and you put in the work, and you're going to want to anyway, because the game is not that long. Like I said, me struggling and getting stuck on a couple of areas did slow me down way more than I thought, and I still beat this in just about 6 hours, a little over 6 hours, 6:15 I think it was, the stream. So if you really consider my intro and everything, so it was probably about 6 hours, and maybe a little bit less when I grabbed some food or whatever. So really under 6 hours I'd say it took me to beat this, and I got stuck on a couple areas, one that took me way longer than I should have, spent way too much time in one area, but still not a bad length for what you're getting. I just think it's one of those things that I think you should, if you have Game Pass, play it. If you like a sci-fi horror experience, I would play it no matter what. If you don't and you're like, should I buy this, I got to put that asterisk on it, because yes, $30 or $20 US or whatever the case is, it's not a ton of money, but when you really think about, you're not getting that much when you're done, and there's not a whole lot of things you can do. It's kind of a mixed bag for me. You know, it's like a really good short experience if you're into that sort of thing, but it's got so many things alongside it. Like, I don't know, it's weird. It's gonna be hard to review this one, or sorry, to rate this one, because I really do feel conflicted with a lot of things. In some ways it's kind of annoying, and other ways it's really, really awesome. So it's definitely gonna be one of those things where you really have to be into the lore, because if you're just at it for a survival horror game, you're probably going to play way better survival horror games, because I feel like this one was super restricted in a lot of ways. But in terms of the mood and atmosphere, I don't think you're going to get a much better one than this right now in terms of that. So with all those things in mind, I will say this game was good, but I wouldn't say it was great. I would say it was pushing like kind of that good range without being great, if that makes sense. So we're kind of in that good area. We're not quite above average. We're above average. Above average for me is kind of like 5 to 6 or 5.5 to 6, you know? So with that being said, in terms of a score with all these things added up, I think this game deserves a 6.5 out of 10. Some might say that's low. I'm sure some of you guys are kind of new to my channel, but for me, a 5 is an average game. It has just as many things wrong with it as it does not. You know, it's pretty, mediocre, rides the waves. So it's pushing a 7. I just think there's just not enough content here to get it that 7 to 7.5 range. And I think once this one does go down in price, I think it'll be worth your time. But if you don't have Game Pass and you're like, should I buy this right now? I would probably wait for a sale. You know what I mean? I would like to see more from this team. I really think this could be a good series, and I don't know if they'll do something exactly the same. I don't know if you really can do a sequel or keep this world build going in another game. But I would like to see more of this genre from this studio. I think they can do great things, and I like that they took what they did. And they changed it up a little bit. Like I said, you will play this game and there will be elements to it where you'll be like, I was not expecting that. I'm actually a little bit confused. There's not many games that are like this that combine these elements and genres. So 6.5 for me. Overall, a good experience. Again, it's up to you whether you think it's worth your time or money based on what I said. Hopefully that helped you make a decision. But I did enjoy myself today, and I hope you guys did as well. So I want to thank you all very much for coming and watching today. If you enjoyed, make sure you leave a like, comment your thoughts below, of course, and don't forget to subscribe if you're new. Turn on those post notifications with that bell icon so you don't miss anything I put out here on the channel. Be sure to follow my social pages, Facebook, X, Instagram, Snapchat, and Discord. Those are linked in the description. If you want to get yourself a shirt or hoodie of mine, there's a link in the description for that. Also an embedded feature right below the stream. You can scroll down and see some goodies I have there, but ultimately just go to the website for the full range of products and customization options there. Big shout out to the sponsors, of course, DX Racer, Bones Coffee, The Ridge Wallet, Mad Rabbit Tattoo. I use their products daily. Check them out for yourselves with the links in the description. Make sure you're using my promo code DANQ8000 to save at checkout with those guys. If you do want to send something to my PO box to be, anything that gets sent there will be open in a social post or in a live stream, whatever makes more sense. An address for that is listed in the description. So check that out if you want to send something my way to check out and display for you on my socials. And finally, be sure to check out and sign up for the Team 8000 membership program if you haven't done so yet. Support the page immensely. There's 4 tier levels, 4 price points. The first tier entry is only 99 cents, so it's super cheap and easy to get into the program that way. However, across various tiers and price points, you'll get things like custom badges by your name, custom emojis used in chat, exclusive video stream access, priority in open lobbies, giveaways, discounts, plenty more. We are working away. Well, we hit 1,800 channel members today, most we've ever had ever. So I am super stoked about that. At this point, we're just going to keep going, see where we can get. 1,900 to 2,000 members. I don't know, man. We'll see. But I apparently owe you guys another emote already. So let's just see what we can get. Keep going. See how many members we can get. If you want to help us keep going, keep increasing that number, get some cool perks, while you're supporting the channel. You can join that with the link in the description. Join button is right below the stream as well. Also section on my main channel page as well. If you want to gift members or send super chats during the course of the stream or while your time here, or if you're not live, whatever the case would be, you can do that with the $ icon next to chat. Click it. You'll get a drop down. If you're gifting members, just remember, you can do 1 to 50 in a single transaction, but ultimately you can gift as many as you want through multiple transactions. Okay? That's going to be it for me today, guys. Thank you so much for coming. Hope you have a great rest of your day, and I hope you enjoyed yourself. Hopefully, we'll see you in the next one. All right, we'll see y'all then. Take care. Peace.
Who's the man with the plan? If you feel trouble wild and wild, don't need violent and hit you 8,000. Wait a minute, hold that style is dialed in. Goddamn Billy Jack, we still riding tires flat. I hear them sirens, see shots flying, so we driving fire back. If they ain't vibing, lie with that. Got me dressed up in all black. What up? Hood up, and I see them haters try to run with us. They gon' need inhalers. Gotta breathe them hard just like Darth Vader. Players, grab your respirators. Night invaders get lightsabered. Mask on for the shooters, move like trash to bed intruder. Got that Glock and got them woofers. Just press play, I'll keep it moving. Who is not? Still you damn fools. Keep it fresh like canned food. There ain't nothing we can't do, so tune into that damn Q. Yeah. It was never, ever a game.